everyone, it's Carter, and welcome to this episode of Making It Up, the show where two writers just sit down and chew the fat, as they say. And today I actually had on Mark Stevens, and if that name is at all familiar to you, well, it could be familiar for a number of reasons, but in my world, he was one of my first guests on this show. He's an old friend of mine. Colorado writer, traditionally has written mysteries, and I think he was like my third or fourth guest on this show. I had him back on because he's just come out with his new novel called The Fireballer, which is not a mystery. It's a story. It's an awesome story. You're going to hear us dissect it a little bit in this episode. But it's basically a story about a phenomenal baseball pitcher with a very dark past, who is essentially ruining the sport of baseball because he pitches so fast that it's literally impossible for a batter to make a decision about whether or not to hit the ball or how to hit the ball. But it's much more of a story than baseball. It's, you would call it literary fiction. But it's about this character, Frank Ryder, and his journey, and also dealing with kind of this ghost that haunts him from his past. So it's a little bit of a different episode because, first of all, he's a repeat guest. Now, usually I don't talk about specific works. I usually talk about kind of the writer's publication journey, where they got their inspirations from and all that kind of stuff. And we covered a lot of that in my first episode with him. So this one, I really wanted to focus on his book because it does have such an interesting trajectory from inception to publication, and it's like #1 Amazon bestseller. It's doing phenomenally, and just to see kind of what that journey was like for him, and the editorial process and pitching it to his agent. So it's a little inside baseball in terms of the actual publication process for this book. The other kind of rule that I broke for my podcast is because he was a repeat guest, I did not subject him to having to make up a story with me because we did that the first time. So I think you're going to enjoy this one, especially if you really want to get into the weeds of, this is somebody who traditionally has written genre fiction in the mystery realm to writing something that's not genre. And how do you do it? Does the voice just come to you? How is it received? So fascinating stuff. But, and I had the fortune of being able to read an advanced copy of the book, and it is fantastic. I think I blurbed it. I highly recommend it. And I hope you enjoy this conversation. This is me talking again to Mark Stevens.
Hey. How's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm good.
Happy New Year.
Same to you, pal. Blondie t-shirt. No, I like it.
Oh, yeah. You're a big music guy.
Oh, yeah. God, yes.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about that. What's, you play, right?
Play bass in a band, actually 2 bands, because the big band has a split off little trio that plays a lot of gigs too. Although we're a little bit on hiatus with the big band right now, but because it's winter and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah. And you just kind of play locally there? Or?
Yeah, pretty much local. We've gone an hour up to Purgatory to play a gig last summer. We haven't gone all that far, day trips pretty much, but Mancos, Cortez, Dolores, a lot of Dolores festivals last summer. I think in July and August, we had like 12 gigs or something like that. It was a pretty busy stretch.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And I'm trying to remember if we discussed this last
down a keyboard player right now.
Oh, I'm trying to remember.
I just listened to that.
Oh, the previous discussion?
Yeah.
Did we talk about music?
We touched on it.
Well, who were your bands growing up?
Oh, my God. Well, I was born, I always say, in the perfect year, which meant I was 9 when the Beatles hit. And I just, from the get-go, I loved the Beatles. I loved the Stones. I loved the Kinks. Huge Kinks fan. Anything on pop radio, I just dug.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you get into the alternative scene?
I go to sleep at night. My parents, big time. I got into punk. I got into alternative. I really didn't like the easy listening 70s, the James Taylor kind of stuff. I really didn't like that at first. I came to appreciate him a lot more later on. But when punk rolled around, I was in Boston working. I used to see the Ramones would come into this tiny little club in Boston called the Rathskeller. I'd see them in this tiny club there. The Talking Heads played the same club. I went up and I was a reporter. I went up and introduced myself to David Byrne and I asked him if I could do an interview with them and asked him for lyrics. And he brought them back the next night and gave me a sheet of lyrics.
Oh my God. That's amazing.
Before the first album came out. Yeah. The Cars were the house band.
Right. Because Cars are Boston. Yeah.
Yeah.
I got my kids into the Cars. They love the Cars.
Oh, they're so good. They're so good.
So, this is the first interview I've done with a repeat guest. I think you were like my third or fourth interview, and I've done about 70 of them now. So it's great to have you back and to catch up again. And the other kind of, not necessarily first, but what I typically don't do is I don't typically dive into any particular work of somebody. It's usually about them and their kind of journey as a writer. But in this case, I definitely want to talk to you about The Fireballer because, first of all, it's a fucking awesome book. and secondly, I think your journey with that book is particularly interesting. So, just kind of for the listeners, traditionally you've been writing mysteries over the course of your fiction career. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, the only thing I ever thought I wanted to write, the only thing I ever thought I could write was crime fiction. I started writing crime fiction in the early 80s. It took me 24 years by my account to get published. I had good agents along the way, a lot of encouragement. Wrote 5 novels in one series, starting to be published in 2007. I, engaged myself in Rocky Mountain Mystery Writers of America. I was on the National Board of Mystery Writers of America. I go to crime fiction conferences like BoucherCon and Left Coast Crime. I give presentations on how to write a mystery. I just love mysteries. That was my world. And to think of leaving it was impossible.
So when you say, that was the only thing you thought you could do, is that because of your journalistic background kind of lended itself to that? Or was it just because, like you said, you just loved them and that's what you wanted to write?
Yeah, I think it's basically that crime fiction has a beginning, a middle, and an end. There's some pact with the readers. The readers expect resolution. There's a pattern to it. There's infinite variety, but there's at least closure at the end. The killer gets killed or the killer gets captured. And there is some sort of restoring of order to the planet, to the world, to our universe. With non-crime fiction, it was always daunting to me because it has to be so heavily character-based, and those resolutions are a little more elusive. They're a little more kind of obtuse. In some cases, there's no resolution. It's a beginning, a middle, and another middle, and you're just sort of left with this hanging feeling.
And it's terribly difficult to judge. I would say with a traditional mystery, I totally agree. Like what you say, when you start to gravitate towards maybe what I do with thrillers, I tend to not, hang on happy endings because to me, it's just about the journey rather than about resolution. But that causes all sorts of problems. But there's still kind of a structure to it. There's still a pace and there's still a momentum that is that the readers expect and they want. And I always thought, like, sometimes when I delve into something different, I get scared because I'm like, I don't know how to, maybe I know how to write a story that's not a thriller, and probably my next book is going to be the closest to that. But you lose all perspective of, is this good? Because to your point, it's so character driven, and that's the hardest thing to please people with. Don't you think?
Yeah, I do. I love reading, quote unquote, literary fiction, or, some novels that are outside of genre, say, that are not sci-fi, I don't read much sci-fi, but things that are clearly not lots and lots of books, but I don't know how I didn't know, and I still don't know how you come up with where it's going to go. Oh, that feeling and the mystery of just climbing, increasing the tension, ramping up the tension. What we always teach in crime fiction world is developing the black moment, the dark hour where all hope is lost, and then something turns and you can restore order.
Right.
No, I'm mystified by the whole process. So.
And even defining what tension is in a non-genre book, because tension can be, just some internal monologue. It doesn't have to be anything scary at all. It can just be, some kind of angst that's just, almost intangible. So, all right. So you publish these books. You're teaching mystery. And then this idea comes to you that you want to write a book about baseball. Walk me through kind of just that inception.
Yeah, it was over a burrito in a park in Denver, and my longtime friend Irv, who we had traded books and we had talked baseball, we had talked politics, we had talked news. He was a guy I knew since the mid-'90s. We always would book 1 or 2 lunches a month, and they would always be in unassuming joints, pizza joints, or over a burrito in the park, glass of lemonade, something like that. Very, very unpretentious guy. And he was the one who planted this idea. He was the one who said, you should write a book about a guy who ruins the game of baseball. And I said, what do you mean by that? And he explained that currently at the top speed of what a pitcher can throw in the major leagues at 105 or 106 is actually the record right now. At that speed, a batter has 0.3 little tiny microseconds to decide whether to swing, how to swing, all that good stuff. It is a moment of sheer focus by that batter. And the fact that they can occasionally put a bat on a ball is a phenomenal feat. Well, Irv said, why don't you write about a pitcher who's throwing 110, at which point there's almost no time. There is no time to get the bat around through the zone and hit the ball. And if this pitcher is pitching, he's posing an existential threat to the game. What are you going to do about the game? Are you going to move the mound back? How are you going to level the playing field, so to speak, with batters? And we kicked that idea around. It was sort of technical in my mind. And I'll wrap up the story and just say that night, the second half of the book kind of fell out of the freaking sky. I guess my writer brain was percolating away at the idea, but my writer brain said, you need an emotional side to this, that something is going to be a little more human. And the question just popped up. What if this pitcher had an incident when he was 12 years old playing Little League? What if a pitch hit and killed an opposing batter? And it was one of those galvanizing, moments. I could feel the book. I could feel the character. I didn't know who he was yet or anything, but I called Irv or emailed him the next day, and he loved it. And then I emailed my agent and told him the whole idea, and he loved it.
So there wasn't any, there's a lot to unpack there, but there wasn't any pushback from your agent saying, this doesn't feel like a mystery to me.
Yeah, no, it was the opposite. He said, I had a couple of standalones in with him at that point. They're still for sale, by the way. But he said, let's pull everything back. I think there was one out on submission at the time. And he said, I'm going to pull those back right now. I want you to go write that book. He was very encouraging.
Wow.
And one additional kind of helpful thing was my agent actually used to be involved with running a AAA team for the New York Yankees. So not only is he a great literary agent, his name is Josh Getzler. He is very steeped in baseball and knows it well. And he had some initial coaching on the story itself. Yeah.
Well, I had an interesting experience reading it, right? So because first of all, just to kind of back up a little bit, you and I talked about this book, I think maybe while you were writing it. And you're the most unpretentious person I probably know. And even you're like, this is a good book. And I'm like, holy shit, this must be a good book because if Mark is saying that. And so I had just kind of all that backstory in my head. And I'm reading this book and I'm almost puzzled by it because like at first I want to feel like, oh, this is kind of like the natural. But then I'm like, but it's not. And there's not like there are scenes where there's not much happening, but it's compelling. And I'm like, that's got to be such a struggle for somebody like you or me to like, where you're always thinking about like, what's the next threat? And where you're just like, you know, he's thinking the same thing in this chapter as he was thinking in the last chapter, but yet it's still, it all serves the story. And then the other side of it was like, and I'm not a big baseball guy, so that's probably was good. I know enough, but, and it gets into the weeds a little bit, but in a way that's like interesting. That must have been a challenge to you, is like how, because we, you know, how do we market this? We don't want to turn people off and have them think this is just literally an inside baseball book. Was there a lot of editing that had to go along with that?
Oh, there's a lot of rewriting. And when I finally did get an editor, bought it from Lake Union. And once she hired an outstanding developmental editor, I got a 16-page single-space letter back with suggestions and things to work on. Yeah, it was all really daunting to me. And because I don't outline, because I go moment to moment, I did not know where this was going. I just tried to live with my character and get to know my character as best I could and put him in situations that I thought would be believable / realistic, and also really put him under a lot of stress because the fact that this happened to him as a 12-year-old is known. It's a public fact, but he also doesn't want to talk about it. He doesn't talk about it. He bottles it up. And I've since actually learned something about my book, which I didn't know at the time. I'm glad I kind of didn't know. But, you know, when you have a big, huge problem in your life, I think there's two things you could do. You could run away from it, or you can just live in the moment and just sort of just do nothing but let it eat away at you and eat away at him. But he doesn't know. And he doesn't know how much it's eating away at him. And he kind of does, but he doesn't. And then the other big, huge problem for him is, and he is aware of it and also isn't aware of it, is that the thing that is causing him so much pain is the same exact thing that is giving him so much pleasure and notoriety and attention.
Right.
And
yeah. I mean, I think that was almost what my blurb was. So that totally resonated, was that, you know, it's that bitter irony of you know, your demon is also your angel, and Frank Ryder. And what was also so, and on top of all of that, you've got a guy who has massive fame and massive wealth, and he's young. And so when you're talking about like your problems eating away at you, he's looking for distractions, and he's got all the resources in the world to have distractions. And he's young and he's immature in a way, but he's also got this heavy past that ages him beyond his years. So he's a really, that was the other thing, is like, you're reading this, I'm like, do I like this guy? Do I not like this guy? And I don't know if I ever quite, and none of that matters, I don't think. You know, because he was perfectly gray, but he's just a tormented guy. But you wanted to understand and see how he was going to deal with that. And even you alluded to, I mean, you know, in terms of mysteries, there was one mystery in the book. Something happened in Toronto that you never kind of get into detail. You can kind of give an idea, but I'm like, that was interesting. I'm like, Mark never said what happened in Toronto.
No.
So,
yeah.
But let's back up a little bit, because so you finish this book, your agent, I assume, gives you notes, but also, you know, embraces this book, and that becomes priority number one for your agent out of all of your submissions. But yet it still took a while.
Yeah. So, first of all, Josh Gessler, my agent, I was actually in New York for a mystery writers event, and at about the halfway mark of writing that book, I'd sent it to him. We had a long breakfast, and he and his assistant, a guy named Jonathan Cobb, gave me some tremendous feedback at the halfway point. It took me another few months, or 7 or 8 months, to finish the book. And then again, Josh gave me some great notes. So I wrapped it up writing it in late in the year in 2019. And we did some final cleanups. Josh decided to wait after the holidays, and then we went out on submission in late January, early February of 2020, about 6 weeks before the world rose up and went on lockdown, and the publishing industry went topsy-turvy, and all these titles got pushed back, and nobody knew what was going to happen with the pandemic and how that would affect bookstores and anything. So we were in chaos.
Yeah.
And Josh just said, be patient. We'll just have to ride this out. And of course, again, the big priority of things in the world and lots of people dying from COVID, you tend to say, my little pet novel is not that big a deal. And I knew that, really just had to ride it out. Actually, when you and I talked was June of 2021, I believe, Carter. And by the way, thank you again for having me back on this fabulous series of podcasts. But so at that point, the book was ostensibly out on submission. It took another until November of that year for us to get an offer. And it was a great offer. And we found an editor who just absolutely, at the halfway point, she emailed Josh and said, I hope nobody else is in on this book because I know I'm going to want it. She was really resonating with her. So that was November of 2022 and 2021. And it was published just this last week. Yeah.
Wow. And what was it like when you got that 16-page single-space editorial letter? Because I talked to a lot of other authors just about, because that moment, and in fact, I'm probably a week away from receiving one, and that's such a scary moment, because even though you resonate with your editor, and the editor usually says, well, let me tell you what I love first. But you skip those paragraphs and go into okay, how hard is this going to be? And it could be months of work. Are you able to kind of look at that and be like, yes, this is kind of overwhelming, but all of these suggestions are great. This is going to make the book better. Or do you just not look at it for a week and just kind of bide your time?
Well, there was no choice in my world. In fact, I think I've already used the phrase galvanizing moment, but the letter came to me a year ago yesterday.
Oh, wow.
On January 3rd, and they had a schedule laid out. I had, there was a date in early February. I had to get the first return back to my development letter. There was another week for round 2 and another week for round 3. So the whole freaking book was due in mid-February. I opened that letter right away and I just dug in. He also, my developmental editor, a guy named David Downing, who I highly recommend to anybody out there, look him up. Wow, he got into the weeds of my book and story and characters. And he just, to me, it was heavy. It was a lot of work, but it was just these series of 2% and 3% changes that added up to a 200% change. There were so many nice tweaks and upgrades along the way. And it was simply a matter of rolling up my sleeves and getting to work.
So it wasn't like
several hours a day,
Yeah. But it wasn't like, hey, I need a subplot.
There was no. And there was no he didn't pull out my entrails and spill them all over the floor. And it was, the structure. In fact, I've had people read the book since who read it in draft form, and they said, what changed? It was much more subtle, series of subtle stuff like that. It was really, really good stuff. And a lot of it had to do with character, giving his girlfriend Maggie a bigger role, changing some of the shading of his potential girlfriend Olivia in the Baltimore area, changing some of the way she was manifesting herself in the story. Things like that.
It's interesting you bring that up. So the relationships, I think, play a really important part. But what my takeaway from it was you have people he cares about, but I think just everything is second to his past. He's not effusive with his love and his affection, although he needs that. He seems to need that, but just everything has this pall from his past weight over it, and he can't escape that. And it almost becomes to the point where that nothing else kind of matters except maybe baseball. And even that sometimes it's just is this worth it? But I think, like what you said, the old cliche, the only way to get past it is go through it. And as painful as that is, and you don't even know if that happens.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's gonna push you through it? What is gonna be the thing that, after all those years of dragging that stuff around and thinking those thoughts and trying to not think those thoughts, but also thinking those thoughts about what happened and what you did, your presence on the planet meant that another child lost his life. That it's a pretty heavy notion to carry around. And so are you going to, you might know deep down you want to get through it, but what's gonna be that thing that gets you through?
Yeah, and that's the other difference with mysteries, I think, is that how do you define, with a mystery, like, okay, there, like you said, there's that resolution. They got through it. They defeated the bad guy, and which is less interesting to me typically. And in a book like The Fireballer, it's like, how do you know if he's through it? Because really getting through it is probably 3 decades of therapy, and that's not a very interesting book.
Right.
But there's not that just seminal, like, okay, now the sun's out, which I think is much more interesting. But you can just see, like, okay, there is progress, or there is a moment, there is an existential shift in his psyche. That's important, but that doesn't mean he doesn't ever carry that around with him anymore.
Right. Exactly.
So,
yeah.
How did you find? I just want to talk about voice for a little bit. I tend, like, whenever I write, I feel like, all right, my voice sounds the same in all these books. Whoever the characters, I mean, there might be some nuanced differences, but generally my style, my pace, and the voice of my characters tends to sound very similar. Did you have to make a concerted effort to not sound like a mystery writer, in terms of the pacing and that kind of a thing? Or was it just like, this is the character that I'm feeling, and this is what's coming out of me?
Boy, I wish I knew the answer to that. I feel like The Fireballer has a completely different voice than my other stuff. Mm-hmm. That's the way it feels.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, this sounds so crazy. The idea and the start of the novel were, it was all so fast. I literally started writing it almost like within a day or two of getting Josh Getzler's, my agent's, approval. I could just feel this character. I didn't know yet who he was. I just wanted to put him in a moment and see what the hell was happening. And I could almost see that. I didn't write the prologue till much later on, and I'm not a big believer in prologues, but at all. I'm not a big believer at all, but I put him in the scene of him batting. He's a pitcher, but he's batting, and this is before the National League accepted the designated hitter baloney. But, he's an American League pitcher for the Baltimore Orioles, playing in Wrigley Field, where there is no designated hitter. So the thing, he's at the plate in Wrigley Field. There's bedlam. I could just see the scene. There's absolute bedlam and manic, crazy ticket madness to try to get into Wrigley Field to see this guy pitch. When the book starts, he's at the plate, and baseball both loves him and hates him. He's posing a threat to the game. He's uppity. He's so good. He's young and just a big star. So what is the game going to do? Both the baseball on the field level between players, and what is the big existential question for the sport? So I could just see this. I don't know. It was one of those moments where, in terms of being a writer, I wasn't kind of just think my way into a scene. It was one of those things where I just kind of felt it all the way through.
It's like cinematic.
Yeah.
I feel like that happens a few times per book, where you just like, almost, and like you see that sometimes you have that scene in mind, and the scene's not going to happen until maybe halfway through the book, and you're so excited to get to that scene because you could just smell it, you know?
Yeah.
And those are the scenes that are usually the best parts of the book because you just so have such awareness of it as a writer. In your edits, because I'm just thinking there is actually like real tension in the book. And a lot of that tension is actually some of the play-by-play stuff. Like I found myself like almost wanting to skip to get to like, please tell me he struck him out or whatever. And it was, and I stopped to kind of consider, I'm like, this is like 7 pages describing a baseball game and I should be bored to tears. And I'm like, I'm not breathing. This is so exciting and scary. And I'm like, wow, that's impressive. Was that difficult did you get feedback on that? Or I'm just thinking, was there a lot of baseball stuff you had to cut out of it? Because it was like really kind of the perfect amount.
Oh, thank you. I'm still getting a lot of think that there's probably too much baseball, be about baseball only. It has to be about something else. He was emphatic about that. And of course, I had a feeling that it would be about more than just baseball. And what scared me is, and I've read enough sports novels to know that if you're a writer of sports novels, you can move that ball anywhere you want it to. You can have anybody hit it as far as they can hit it or strike out in a very weird fashion. Anything is possible from the writer's perspective. And what you don't want to do is have the reader be super conscious that this is all being manipulated. Of course it's being manipulated. It's the writer's imagination. I don't really know how to answer that question other than to say I just wanted to put a human being on the field. I wanted the reader to feel what it was like to stand in his shoes. I wanted the cleats on the rubber of the mound. I wanted the sensations to be as human as possible. So you put as much humanity into his perspective of the game as possible, whether we were seeing a game through his eyes or the other major character in the book, which is the owner of the Orioles. A lot of chapters are told from the owner's perspective, and he has a different view of it, of course. But I guess my password of my kind of my code word for the writing was human being. Make sure it's human.
Yep. Yeah. Well, you certainly achieved that. And what is so what? Are you at a crossroads now in terms of what you want to write?
Well, oddly enough, since these 2 other standalone crime fiction novels have not sold, by the way, they're still available if anybody wants to, contact my agent, talk to them about those 2 books. I've actually had another idea floating around for a long time, and this one's set in the world of rock and roll, speaking of music.
Yep.
And I'm about coming up on the 50,000 word mark on that. And
fantastic.
So it's it's a shock to me. I know I would not have dived in on this idea, which has been around for a while. I was telling a friend about it a little while ago, and she said, "You've been talking about that book for a lot of years." I said, "I have. I didn't know that." And
it just needs to come out. Yeah,
it's been floating around.
But similarly, it's non-genre, it sounds like.
Yeah, it is non-genre, straight up. And I thought, Brenda outline, I did write an outline, Carter, I have to confess.
How? I don't know how to do
The agent said, I know, I roughed it. I wouldn't call it an outline, I would call it a treatment. It was sort of just a 3 or 4 page overview, and he read it and said, go. So,
wow.
He liked it, so.
Is it helpful now? Like, because I always think like the actual act of writing has gotten pretty easy for me. It used to be terribly difficult to just literally write sentences. Now all that is easy. The hard part is knowing what to write. And so like you, I don't outline. But sometimes when I know, at least if I know, okay, the next 5 chapters, this is what's going to happen, then I just fly through it. So having written that 3 to 4 page treatment, did that make getting to the 50,000 words a lot faster?
Yep, absolutely. And it's insane how quickly, again, this one's coming together. That Fireballer was about 18 months, including rewrites, which is twice as fast easily. than anything I've ever written. And this one's come together in sort of the same pace. So
that's fantastic.
And what about you, Carter? You mentioned something non-thriller. Is that,
Yeah, I mean,
did that come together in a different?
Yeah, I had this idea during the pandemic. I just had this image of this 21-year-old girl in my head who's a savant, and she became a savant through trauma when she was young. And I couldn't stop thinking about this girl. And I'm like, I don't know what her story is, but I want to see what it is. And I placed this story in 1987. So it was a really different kind of a book. And there's suspense for sure, but it wasn't like right out of the gates, somebody bleeding to death. And, and so it became this journey for me, and it became a difficult journey because, my agent and my editor were like, and we had already sold it. I sold it on the premise, but they're just like, we're not feeling like this is like propelling. And so I made tons of changes. And recently I just spent 4 months converting the entire book from third person past tense to first person present tense. And that's a hell of an exercise. And I'm glad I went through it, and it completely changed the tone of the voice.
Yeah.
Now you're like right in her head. And the reason I hadn't done that initially is I didn't know if I could get that close to her because she's so different than who I am. Mm-hmm. And so we did it. And these are the editorial notes that I'm now waiting for. But my agent read it. She's like, you finally found the right way to tell this story. So I'm hoping my editor will say the same. And then, it'll probably come out towards the end of this year or early next year, depending on their schedule. But it's not, I don't know if I have a typical book, but it's not, nobody would pick it up and be like, oh, this is absolutely Carter Wilson book. It's a little bit slower paced, I guess, but I love it. I mean, I like I said, I couldn't stop thinking about this girl. So, but I've learned along the way, like, okay, here are the problems that come with doing that if you're known for writing kind of fast-paced thrillers. So it's been interesting.
Can you share the working title on that? And does it have a thriller arc to it or trajectory?
Yeah, kind of. I mean, it's called The Father She Went to Find. And, basically when this girl, when she was 7, her mother pushed her down the stairs and she broke many bones, but she kind of became enlightened in a way. And she came out of this coma with some pretty substantial mental abilities. But her father left while she was in a coma. So, and every year he sends her a birthday card, and that's the only time she hears from him. And when she turns 21, he sends a card, says, I'm never going to write to you again after this. And so she decides to leave this world where she's been very secluded and she's basically in an institute where they study her. And she's like, I'm leaving. I'm just like going on my own. I'm going to go find him. And so it's her journey to find him, but also discovering what it's like to be in the real world for the first time. Even with her abilities, can she survive? So, and bad things ensue. So it does have thriller aspects to it, but it's really just about, her kind of, in a way, awakening. So we'll see. I love it. It's just not typically when I write. So, all good. Well, listen, we're going to wrap up. And because you're a second-time guest, I'm not going to subject you to having to make up a story.
Because, the reason you're doing that is because I failed so miserably the first time.
Oh, no. You didn't have.
Yeah.
No, I was thinking, I'm like, I'm probably going to have more guests on repeating. And I'm like, maybe I'll just do it just the one time because it does stress everybody out.
I proved why I was never going to be part of Second City on that show.
Oh, good, man. Well, listen, hey, Mark, congratulations on your success with The Fireballer. And it is just a fantastic book. And it's, regardless, no matter what happens with it, you've got this book that you're just like, wow, that's a huge accomplishment. And I know it has tremendous success right now.
Thank you. It's a weird feeling to know from inception to today is just.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a great story.
It's wonderful.
And I think listeners are going to appreciate hearing kind of the inner workings of what it takes to to create a book like you created. So thank you very much. And hey, man, have a great rest of the winter. And hopefully I'll get to see you in the not too distant future.
Thanks a million, Carter.
All right. Take care, Mark. Bye. Bye. So that's it. That's my conversation with Mark Stevens, my second conversation with Mark Stevens. And yes, there was no story. Sorry about that. But because this is a repeat guest, I figured I wouldn't subject him a second time to the stress of improv storytelling. But yeah, it was good catching up with him. He lives in southeastern Colorado, so I don't see him that often anymore. He used to live in Denver. But hopefully we'll see him again soon. And I'm just so excited about all the success he's having with his new book, The Fireballer, which I highly, highly, highly recommend. Find out more about him at writermarkstevens.com. And you can investigate more about me at my website, carterwilson.com, and subscribe to my newsletter, check out my appearances, and of course, please, please, please buy my books. That's always nice. So anyway, that's it for now. Thanks as always for watching and or listening, and more episodes coming out very soon. In the meantime, take care.